Hello, people, and welcome back to the Tech of Tomorrow podcast with Sebastian Hidalgo. I am Sebastian Hidalgo, and before we get talking with our guest today, remember, please, housekeeping notes: like, subscribe, comment, follow the show on Spotify, help us grow tremendously, and it keeps this thing fun to do. So, my guest today is a friend who had me on his shows and who's posted a lot of content from that appearance. His name is Max Gilbert. He's a sales professional that does sales for reluctant sellers, meaning if you would rather do the work than sell the work, Max is the guy for you. And now there are a lot of people out there, Max, that have this issue, right? That they like building, they like creating, they maybe have something great to offer the world, but they cannot sell it. So, what made you decide to target them, to serve them? Actually, that's the word I like.
Hmm. I mean, it's my sort of origin story in sales. I have a background in consulting, and then moved from consulting over to a chief of staff position at a pre-seed startup that was fresh out of Y Combinator, and had worked with the CEO on building a lot of our initial systems, getting our initial customers, doing sort of our initial marketing and helping with fundraising and all of the things that helped us get from pre-seed to seed and then through Series A. And then it was time for us to hire, when we raised our Series A, we were like, great, now we can hire a real salesperson, quote unquote. And I actually led the sales that process, that hiring process and interview process, and sort of worked with a bunch of executive search firms and trying to find people who would help us sell and help us grow and help us sort of expand and get into enterprise sales, and really just kind of handing off what the founder and I thought of as like this hot potato of like, we don't really want to be doing the sales. We want to be doing all the other stuff. And someone else who has a Rolodex could kind of come in and do this. So we found a guy who was kind of on paper perfect, and then was the first person to let go at the company, just because it kind of wasn't clicking and it wasn't working. Um, and what I realized, and it wasn't even his fault. And a lot of times I think that I see that in that case where that first sales hire doesn't work out, there's sort of like a propensity also to blame the person. But it's not, because hiring someone who's really good at taking something and blowing it up, or taking it, who has a sort of demonstrated history of coming in and selling something and like kind of identifies as a salesperson. It's like, there's a product to sell it. My job is to sell it. I got the scripts. I got the decks. I know what I've got kind of a clear heading, is very different than sort of startup sales, particularly at the early stages when so much is still being built and defined. And there's so much sort of experimental iteration, both on the sales process and the customer profile and the product itself. And that often the founder or founding team, or the people who might be more in kind of a product background or an engineering background, and don't see themselves as salespeople, are actually the best people to be out there doing that selling. And the challenge is they don't want to. And so that was me too. And so we had to let go of that person. And the founder had a executive coach, a guy who was also a sales coach, a guy named Tom Batchelder, who has a book, Selling 180. And he said, Max, you sell, you do it. And I remember having this like viscerally negative reaction to just being like, gross. Salespeople are gross. Sales is gross. I don't respond to cold emails. I don't ever pick up my phone when I get called. I hate when people approach me in a store and try to sell me something. So like to inflict that on other people just felt like terrible. And Tom and his Selling 180 approach was like, great, let's throw out the book of what you think sales is and do it totally differently. And it took me, and I still was like embarrassed to admit like I'm in sales for a while, because it's just something I really was reluctant to embrace. But the way that I have found to overcome that reluctance and that aversion to selling is one that that work is what I'm sort of passionate about, and helping people realize that they don't need to be somebody else, or act in a certain way, or wear a mask, or sort of adopt external traits or personality characteristics to be effective at selling. Actually, the most effective way is just to be more themselves.
Bad salespeople have cast such a huge shadow on this profession, right? Like the craft is polluted by all these bad actors, and some are just they are not even aware that they're bad, and they don't do it even with evil intent. Like the person chasing you at the supermarket, at the grocery store, is not being like, okay, I'm gonna manipulate this guy into selling him. I don't know, whatever it is that they're selling. It's just that I don't know what do you think? Because we have the bad actors, manipulative people who have a certain personality, who use sales as their playground to turn people into money. Cool, but what do you think makes the unaware, terrible salesperson so terrible? It's just that they're
Mm.
bad at it, and they also have this image of the manipulative, pressuring salesperson, and that's what they do, maybe.
I think that there's a it's why are you doing this? And you even said it. It's like turn prospects into money, right? Is my motivation to like close as many people as possible and make as much money as possible? And that's what I'm doing. And I see dollar signs when I see sort of a qualified prospect, or is my kind of real driving motivation to actually help and deliver value in that service? Now, it would be completely delusional and ridiculous to say that the desire to make money and be successful is not also present in anyone who's sort of engaging in this, right? But it's just what's the foundation? What does success look like to you, right? If success looks like taking my commission checks and buying a yacht and like being done with this and kind of cashing out, that's a very different mindset and perspective and how you're going to approach the whole thing. Then success means being successful for my business, having more customers, having a healthy pipeline, having a robust referral or kind of word of mouth network, having sustainable processes that allow me to do the work that I love doing. And I think that's that sort of that idea of the doer seller, the person who does the work, who sells the work and then does it, as opposed to sells it and then hands it off to somebody else to deliver, is it's easier in that case with that persona to help them anchor into the reason you like doing the work, like is the same reason that you'll be effective at sales if you kind of can do it from that place. And I think technical founders in deep tech and people with a science or engineering background that often are the same profile as someone who might be a lot of people who kind of leave a startup or an executive position and started sort of advisory or a solo consultancy or a small consultancy. And they really are passionate about doing the work and get just cringe or get weird or like are not as compelling as they are in a doing mode when they're in a selling mode, and kind of helping address that dissonance.
I like that framing because I onboarded these new clients, or we are in the process, right? He's 24. He's running a company in real estate, and they are turning over great amounts of revenue. And before he was just doing founder-led sales. I don't take this size of client, but he came from another client whom I love deeply. So I said yes. And talking to him, he's telling me about his sales process. And he goes, I don't have a sales background. I just dropped out of college. I found this. I started doing it a while ago. And all I do with clients is I'm just happy to be there. I show up and I talk to them. And I told him that that's all you need to be great at sales. Like, you've been doing amazing. And his close rate is the close rate of somebody who does sales for a living. Why? Because he's authentically happy to be there. Of course, he makes his money because he's turning over huge revenue, but he's happy to be there. He wants to help.
Mm.
And he has so much deep knowledge of what he's doing that the sales process becomes easy because there's no objection he cannot overcome. He knows what he's building, like he knows the thing he's doing. So you throw an objection at him, and he's gonna reverse it. Why? Because first of all, he's being honest, like what he sells does what he says he does, and second, he's the expert.
And you said he sells like someone who has a career in selling. I mean, you said at the outset, and I think it's like known. There's a lot of like stats around this about the number of salespeople that miss quota, and like within sales teams, the percentage of the sales team that actually carries, right, like the top 10% actually drive 90% of the growth. So to your point about just selling like someone who does sales for a living, I actually think that there's a broader problem here also of even the people who do sales for a living are also struggling, are not doing so well because they're, I think, losing sight of exactly what you're talking about like what is it that you're doing, what is it that the craft is, right? I think it's a broader problem of just like forgetting what the craft, the art of it is, and overcomplicating it often as well. Just to your point, it's actually quite simple, but simple doesn't mean easy.
Never. Also, I think I read recently 62% of sales teams miss quota.
Right. So it's like
It's an
no one's
insane
good at
amount
it,
of
right?
sales. It's terrible. And to your point, it's yes, he's outperforming professional salespeople. And the problem probably is that, sometimes sales departments become completely detached from what it is that the customer experience will be. Either before sales or after sales, they just close and it's over. That means they feel nothing towards what they're selling. Again, it's just a rotation of calls, close or doesn't close. That's what it is. And it should be much more than that because, I mean, sales should be part of the customer experience, should be as much as possible a delightful process where somebody solves a problem for you and then you end up paying for it. But it's because they are fixing that problem for you or they are guaranteeing you that they will fix it. So yes, that's a great point.
And another like huge offshoot of this, right? I mean, on the one hand, we could talk about like founder-led sales and deep tech sales and sort of navigating the early stages there. But like for a team as they grow too, like one thing that you have to think about, and that a lot of companies make this shift to, at a certain point, you grow from the people selling the work are also involved in the delivery of the work to, oh, once we get big enough, we have the sales team and then the customer success team, and that handoff gets like more and more extreme as you scale. It almost becomes like, well, it's necessary as we grow to just further like isolate these functions and have kind of the systems in place that lead from where you end up that the person selling it is maybe checks in, I don't know, quarterly in some kind of account review, but otherwise is not like attached to it. And maybe that's more efficient. Maybe that's more optimally sort of in a like purely quantitative world where you're building a model. It's true that at scale, it would make sense to operate that way. But I don't think that's actually the most compelling. That's the way to be the most like effective long-term in maintaining and building relationships, whereby the person, to your point, the person selling the work is actually so deeply steeped in delivering it that like it's one process, that they're so involved in the delivery of the work also. I heard a quote recently that I loved, which is like when people are talking about trimming the fat, right? Or like ultimately getting more efficient, right? Like trim the fat, cut waste, get more efficient. The fat is what makes like life enjoyable. It's what makes food enjoyable. It's the good stuff, right? And so obviously you don't want to have too much of it, and you don't want to be like have bloat and like gross inefficiency. But you need, the marbling in the steak is what makes it delicious, right? And so like if you're trying to create your organization just to be as lean, 99.9% lean ground beef, like I'd rather have some fat in there and some inefficiency that ultimately makes it more compelling so that people come back and keep buying.
I love this analogy. And, part of the issue is that a lot of org charts and how they're planned out they either come from like the 50s and 60s where the world was a different damn universe and nothing looks like it looks today, and the consumer was a different consumer. And the other part is they come from think tanks. They come from these organizations that actually, okay, this is how we think it should be better because on paper, this number improves this other number, and that's how we create a synergy, the most beloved term by all the trashy consultants. So we create this synergy, and you have more money, more revenue, more shareholder value, and that's how we end up losing, again, losing touch with the customer. And something that you made me remember is that Gareth and I were on a podcast 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago with Mopros, and I brought up a point which is a controversial opinion, but is I stopped believing in sales, marketing, and customer success teams. I believe in revenue teams where you have marketers, salespeople, and customer success professionals. Why? Because I don't see a world where you can push a service or a product without those three categories of professionals being together in the same meetings, exchanging ideas. Because otherwise you have, the classic sales marketing rivalry, which, as you know, in technical industries is like, oh, it's so common. Everybody looks at marketing. Oh, look at these slide pushers and merch designers. And marketers look at sales. Look at these guys that are just talking the whole day and they put pressure on us. And sales looks at customer success, and the whole thing is like, they don't know what they're doing. I think there should be a revenue team with at least these three categories that come together.
And of those teams, I often find, I'm not sure what you're finding, it's the customer success people that are actually like the heart of it, right? They're usually getting paid the least appreciated, the most overworked, but they're the ones that have the best relationships, are like delivering the most value. And often within an organization, if they're looking for ways actually to be more efficient, it's those customer success people should have more be more brought into the like new customer acquisition and expansion processes, because like they actually are the best able to speak about the work that they deliver. Um, and like another piece too around just sort of like word choice. When we talk about sort of synergy being like is people talk about organic growth a lot, right? As sort of being like the thing we should aspire towards, and that's the greatest piece, because I think ultimately, because it's thought of as like, oh well, it's free, right? But if you really think about that word and like what organic growth means, it means it's alive. It means it's not sterile. It means it's not formulaic down to the like level of, okay, well, if I'm going to invest this many marketing dollars, I must see an immediately directly attributable ROI through a model. So like I ran this, I did these 7 LinkedIn posts, like what's my ROI, right? It's thinking about it as a system, as a holistic organism. To your point, it's like sales, marketing, customer success working together to create this. And when you have an organic system that's alive, it is harder to like reduce with a sort of completely reductivist approach down to like a mechanical operating growth engine system machine. But because I think the machines like eventually will aren't as effective long term as the thing which can grow and heal and repair itself and adapt over time.
We are touching on such a pivotal concept, and I already know that if somebody's listening and they belong to like the old school
Hopefully
way of
somebody's
business and
listening.
sales, they will here be thinking this doesn't work. This works only for small companies. This is not scalable. Keywords there. This is not scalable. And
Right.
then, though, I want to bring the attention back to let's say 2015 Starbucks and 2018 Apple. And I don't know if Apple, maybe it's still the case, right? But let's talk about Starbucks first. There was a moment in which pre-pandemic Starbucks was a place where people came to drink coffee and meet and work. It was a social place with people that were happy to work for the Starbucks brand. And I know because I once had a girlfriend who was like, one of her things that the mini jobs she wanted to do as a teenager was, I want to work at Starbucks. Like the power of the brand was so big that there was a generation that saw Starbucks on TV and wanted to be behind the counter serving somebody else. So that made, and they got your name wrong and all the stuff that they don't do anymore. So the moment they stopped being a social space, they stopped doing the personalized wrong name thing. Now they have been struggling, and they brought in a new CEO that's trying to change that, and he's trying to bring it back to what it was. So customer experience was driving the sales for a company that has a customer lifetime value of like 12,000 per customer, and they sell coffee. Now, the other thing is Apple, and they probably still do this, but if you remember the Genius Bar collected these technical minds that were there for you, and they knew how to fix everything in your phone, but they were excited to be there because they also cared about you and they care about the product, and they knew everything about the product. So you go into the Genius Bar, you will be met with a smile because those guys were happy to be there, and because they knew everything up, and you felt cared for because they knew how to solve your issues. And so I bring all this up to say, even at the highest levels of companies that everybody would like their organization to be like and to become, they put the customer first, or at least at some point, at the height of their success, they did put the customer first. And that's what generated the revenue.
We've seen, I mean, I've sat in rooms and workshops where people say, like, we want to deliver an Apple like experience. I'm sure you've heard this too, right? And it's like, but then you go proceed to roll out something that's like grossly not that, right? And it's okay, so what we all recognize what good looks like, but then don't do it. And I think it goes back to one of the sort of first questions you asked me about, like, well, why are people who are well intentioned still so bad at this, or still so like kind of gross in their kind of approach to sales or to revenue growth? And I think ultimately it goes to like, how do we define success at both the individual level and at the collective level? And like, what are we trying to do? And if it's about like me climbing a ladder, like defining, like hitting certain benchmarks and delivering on certain metrics, right? We're hiring consultants so that I can blame them when things don't go well and kind of like, hedging risk, right? It's not how you get there, right? The profound sort of mysterious weirdness about this that I just love and keeps me coming back is that like first you have to like let go of that need to be profitable and scalable and focus on your customer and from that is actually what's going to lead you, of course, to be the most profitable and scalable and long-term sustainable, right? But like if you're just chasing the profitability and the scalability and the renown and awards and accolades and money, that's you can get there, but usually not sustainably, not long term, because ultimately, to your point, you bring back the CEO who has people writing your names on cups again. Like that's the
Yes.
that's the thing that worked.
And it's such, I'm always amazed, as I'm a psychology nerd and a human nature like student. So I'm always amazed at seeing how self-proclaimed logical thinkers like executives, you can walk them through a logical progression and you can trap them. Because if you ask them, do you think that customer experience matters? They will say yes. Do you think that a great product and an amazing customer experience that beats your competitors would bring more money to your company and retain customers longer? And they would agree to that too. And then you would ask them, so why haven't you invested 3 times the budget you're investing in customer experience instead of cutting costs in those areas? And they will immediately get trapped and say, oh, yes, because you have to focus on profitability. But you just told me that the way to profitability is customer experience and better delivery and better quality of product or service. So we have a contradiction in there that, again, is one of the many cases where you see people do use data to justify logical emotions. And the logical, what they're justifying there is the need for the company to be profitable and succeed. That manifests as fear, and they rationalize that fear through we need to be profitable, we need to use this data and cut these costs. What that leads is inevitably to profits falling down and the whole system breaking because you didn't think logically. You were using logical data, but you didn't think logically. And a lot of an overwhelming number of leaders do not think logically when it comes to these things.
And again, just back to it's simple, it's not easy, right? Happy customers deliver profits, right? Of course, am I like, sure, you need to make sure you're watching your margin and being efficient. And again, we said like, it's not, you're not just throwing basic business sense out the window, but I think that how do you see is the growth of the company and the hitting our metrics and delivering that value or shareholder value or whatever it is the end all be all, the ultimate? Is that what we're about? And the way we get that's the end and the means is happy customers? Or is it that the end is happy customers and then that results in a profitable, successful long-term business? So it just goes back again to your point about like, it's not that we're talking about evil, nefarious, we're talking about well-intentioned individuals. And then to your point, you drive people to this cognitive dissonance. And for me, once you are in that realm, that's where the like interesting, juicy human stuff is and the fun work happens, right? The type of like work we do. And I think the parallel between, right, the sort of high-powered executive I find on the startup side is confronting this reality of the fact that 90% of startups fail, right? And people hate talking about it, and people get so like, and people will the bending over backwards of like the mental gymnastics that people do to say why that doesn't apply to them is always shocking to me. And I find that, and while people don't like talking about it, the same idea, once you sort of recognize and admit that you're in a particularly, like, this is a risky endeavor, we're trying something new. Obviously, the VCs too, where the power law is how they decide how to invest, right? They know that they are successful when 1 of 10 or 20 or whatever it is of these companies are wildly successful. But then when they're actually in any given board meeting with any given company, they sort of act like, well, this company has to be, we can't take like a risk. This one has to be, we need to post certain numbers next quarter. And it's like, well, can we step back, recognize what we're doing, that there's a risk inherent in it, acknowledge it, face that scary fact, that really scary fact head on with eyes wide open, and then take action and like be okay with it at the end of the day, right? We have to confront our mortality. We all should be living that way, right? We're all going to die. Yes. And if you think about that, maybe more often than we also think about that more often than we do, because that should inform how you live, right? And you have to that cognitive dissonance, that thinking logically, but then stumbling into like sort of where the matters of the heart cloud, that is like the art of, being alive, being human, being a successful person, which is working, and professionalism and sales is part of that, not obviously the end all be all.
It's a key part of that though, because I mean, I am of the opinion that everybody's in sales. They like you can hate it, you can love it, you can have all your opinions. You're always in sales. You've been in sales since you were trying to convince the teacher at school that the dog did eat your homework. You were trying to sell them, yes, see? You were trying to sell the teacher something. You've been in sales since you first landed your eyes on that girl in high school and you wanted her and you needed to look like a viable option. It's just we call it different ways, but in the end, you're framing, positioning, and persuading. So with that said, there's a question I wrote here like at the beginning, but we haven't touched upon it because we just took a tangent. What is the key to success in startup sales?
Well, and let's define our term. What is success? How, right? Because I think it's often people define success as like getting to the next fundraise. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about, right?
Let's define success as
Yeah.
having a business that doesn't fail.
I think the key to success is knowing who your customer is and connecting with them and being sort of memorable and relevant to them, right? And I know, if particularly sort of like with the deep tech focus, often your actually ability to deliver on the claims you're making is going to be pretty far in the future from where you are, right? And so the trust is even more important in that realm, where you can't necessarily deliver on that immediately. And there's so much over promising and under delivering and hype. And those are the challenges I think that kind of plague a lot of these companies. As well as the other biggest risk is the sort of if you build it, they will come mentality, which is just like, again, one of these, everyone knows it doesn't work. Everyone would admit that doesn't work. And the number of founders you meet who are sort of like, okay, well, we'll have our go-to-market launch, a couple more months when this product is ready, when this feature set is ready, when this is ready, this is it. And of course it'll be so, or wait, I'm sure you've heard, people have to see it to understand it. I have to be able to fully demo it in order for them to get it. And it's just like, no, they need to get it so that you know what to build. Right. And then back to your Apple analogy, everyone will tell you, or you hear Steve Jobs and Henry Ford. And if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And no one would have told me they wanted an iPhone. And okay, you know what? You're not Steve Jobs. You're not Henry Ford.
Everybody loves to be nitpicky with the quotes that will make them an exception. Like, yes, I want a company like Steve Jobs, and I'm willing to live by one of his quotes and ignore the rest of the probably 30 million sentences he put on his life. Because
or do you meditate daily, or take care of yourself and sort of live the way that he did, or anything else that was part of his whole ethos, right? Like,
and I'm so amazed that build it and they will come is a thing. And I'm not amazed because hearing it from you is a new thing, because I have friends in the startup space and I see it. I clearly see like, here's what we're building. Here's why we believe it's cool. And then you're like, okay, and why should the people you want to sell it to believe it's cool? And they go, because we built it. And they go, that's an uncomfortable sales proposition, because okay, you believe in your product. It's good, right? You should be proud of what you built, but it makes no sense. Like you said, they will not come just because you build it. You need to communicate it. You cannot expect to have a full demo before people get it. Think about ChatGPT, right? How many demos did Sam Altman need to do to billions of people to get them to use ChatGPT? None. He put it in the market, and that thing, you get immediately how it works. You talk to it. And it became extremely popular, but it was easy to use at first.
I mean, this could be a whole other tangent too, but like, they're not profit. I mean, the stuff going on in the hype and the like, just the actual business and like it's amazing, right? Sam Altman said the other day, I think it's insane that I pay $20 a month for sort of GPT Pro. They're losing money on all those pro plans, right? And like they were kind of both Anthropic and OpenAI were going to colleges and universities and sort of giving people like for final season kind of a discounted access to and making it sort of seem like this altruistic endeavor, like, you know, helping people. And they really, I think they were going to investing tens of millions of dollars in a campaign ultimately sort of tiered towards growth. And you have to believe that at some point this model shifts to profitability, which is also dependent on just like physics and the cost of like powering and cooling these data centers. So there is also in that, like, yes, on the one hand, but on the other hand, and I think this is the problem of deep tech, you could build something amazing that people love, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the business model works out, right? And so the challenge, how to be successful, is to figure out how to make a business model that works for your technology, right? I know so many people building so many cool things, and it's like, this would be amazing if we could actually get it to market. This would be transformative, but if we can't, and so whether it's sort of systemic changes in incentives and governance and policy and whatever else is that needs to happen in order for this to be successful, that is actually what it's going to take for your startup to be successful or for your technology to be successful, because you have to like instantiate this thing in the real world, and the real world is driven by incentives. and you like, it's not just about building the cool thing. You have to make it a viable business.
I love that you say that, because I was at an event last month and there were investors, and one of them, you know, of course, the room was packed with like founders, dozens of founders. And he said one thing that I think everybody felt that in their guts. He said, a product is not a business, no matter how good it is. So investor, and he explained why investors ignore 99% of pitch decks. It's because there is a lot of product in every pitch deck, but there is never a business case, or rarely there is a business case that says, hey, this is how this thing makes money. This is how it breaks even, and this is how you turn a profit out of it, investor. It's just look at my product. It's cool. It's life-changing. And I like that you counterbalance my GPT point with the fact that they're not profitable, because, you know, nobody wants to talk about the fact that 90% of startups fail. Another topic people don't want to talk about is that maybe we are in an AI bubble. And this whole thing is sustained by VC money and a lot of funding, just like the dot-com bubble was.
By those same consultants who love talking about synergy, and so much fear-mongering.
Yes, just like, you know, the dot-com bubble was relying on funding money, just like the big data bubble was also depending on that money. The issue is, if we are in a bubble and at some point it just pops, we're going to have a problem where maybe people will have to start paying the real amount of what running these LLMs cost. And then what's 90% of the customer base is going to disappear, because who's paying thousands per month to just ask ChatGPT to Google for you, which is what it's doing.
Maybe this forces us to get really serious about investing in like fusion energy, or like really something truly the quantum computing, the things that will actually make it sort of like affordable to run. But in the current state, to your point, I think if every query would have like a price tag on it, right? And every time you asked it to like edit it for something, it was like, well, this is going to be like $6. You'd be like, a lot of times you'd be like, well, I'm going to just do it myself. Like that value equation isn't there. So
I think I'm reading that book. I think I read it. I think I'm Googling that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see an ad on Google. It's fine. I'm okay with that.
Yes. So, you know, we've been talking a lot about the criticalities of being in the industry we are. But what is it that you love the most about the thing we do, about sales, about teaching people how to sell?
I think it's something I'll often say is that like sales is the forum which tends to bring out like the worst in people, their worst fears and insecurities and anxieties. And like, I love that about it. And I care more about, and I've like been trying to psych myself up to have sort of the chutzpah to just admit that I actually don't care that much about sales. I care about like human growth and sort of the confrontation with self that has to happen in order to really be effective at this. And then what that allows people to do in terms of how they like live their life more confidently and providing for themselves and their family and what they want to be doing. But it's something about selling where people just get so uncomfortable and so weird, and dealing with that is so deep and meaningful. And I think you kind of come to these insights where I'm all like learning new things every day, and working on trying to more deeply understand the human condition, myself, other people, get better at sort of communication and connection and empathy and relationships. And so for me, it's really what sales reveals that I think is so much more interesting than the actual sales itself.
Yes, it's so fascinating, right? Because there's so many layers to sales. Meaning, even in a sales methodology like mine, that's basically based around questions and based around you steering the conversation rather right, than you having to qualify yourself to the buyer or just you pushing for the product. It's very diagnostic. It's very in depth. You will still get, and I get people to the moment, especially beginners, to the moment where they have to, hey, name a price, name a product. And that's always when, like, some people will always break there. And it's funny because I used to be that kind of person. I used to be able to carry my own damn process up till the end. And I would hit that barrier of I have to name a price. And that's where my biggest weak spot was. And, if people want like an accelerated feeling of what being in sales is like, get a list of 50 phone numbers, block out 1 hour, and try to call those people to offer them anything. You're gonna face all your demons at once because cold calling, I think, takes the difficulty of sales and just condenses it into one moment where you're gonna be most likely rejected and it's gonna be awful. Super interesting.
I'm like, are you okay with that? Can you handle that? Can you hear the painful no, right? And what does that mean? And how do you think about that? And like what you need to, the work that you need to do sort of around and before and after to be able to do that, I think is just so human and so interesting. And one thing I've been trying to sort of talking about recently in my content is a ton of people, particularly all those sales professionals, quote unquote, that you mentioned earlier, and all the people who are, would you say, polluting the craft or are overcome. There's like a caffeine, testosterone, bravado induced sort of like rallying that like psyching oneself up to overcome this sort of internal resistance, which just we have to consider the cost of like to the individual, to the person, to the organization, right? Of like, what is that? I think I saw you actually posted recently too about like those 2-day sales retreats and like the sugar high that they basically
Mhm.
are, where you're like, you're okay, you feel great. It's lasting growth, sustainable growth, transformation of people and processes and companies and lives. Happens from kind of that deep work that's harder and less sexy than just hitting the phones and like and banging a gong at when you make a sale, right? Like that's one way to overcome kind of the fear of rejection. Puffing your chest up. Another is learning how to be comfortable with rejection, which is much
Mhm.
harder.
It's fun, and it's funny you say that because I posted that, and I even said it in the post. I think, I mean, I do those retreats, I do offsite sessions, but I also know that the big problem with them is that people remember 20% of what they learned there, and they apply probably half of that. So in total, what they applied is 10% of what you taught them, which is why I'm excited about the partnership that post is talking about because it helps you it helps you scale coaching, which is usually non-scalable. But yes, the retreats, if that's all there is to the game, it's like consultants who only give workshops. Like retreats and workshops are I would say an essential part of the game because you need to have one session when everybody gets briefed on what's going to happen and what has to happen. But the follow-up is what matters the most because if you just give your sales presentation and they clap and they feel great and they're motivated and tomorrow we're going to crush quota and you don't give them even a playbook to follow the next 8 weeks or 4 weeks, those 8 weeks will go by and they will start missing quota again. Why? Because the sugar high hit them. They don't remember much of what happened. They weren't giving a playbook. There wasn't any change management. and everything goes back to how it was. Now it's crap for the client, it's crap for you as the sales professional, because then it's your reputation. Then they're gonna go around saying, yeah, we bought this just sales training for these guys, it doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that you didn't apply it. But from the client side, it's not even your fault that you didn't apply it. It's you weren't followed, you weren't coached into applying it. It's a, again, it's complex, it's not easy, but it is simple. Like, you cannot just deliver on 2 day offsite and expect them to excel at the results.
I think this is like an interesting sort of microcosm of everything we've been talking about. And I know like, and positioning, which I know is something we've talked about a lot last time. I've been I actually am partnering with with Tom Batchelder of Selling 180, who kind of got me into this in the first place. And some of the engagements we've been selling, we've been trying to figure out like, how do we position ourselves against other people who do sort of these 2 day offsites and sort of sales trainings and things. And I'm more of a like, and we have a healthy tension in this. I'm more of like a diehard sort of, be sort of like, well, not vulnerable, but transparent, like radical transparency to a fault potentially. And just, I think they don't work long term if your goal is transformation. If your goal is to get a little bump, to see potentially a bump in next month's or next quarter's numbers, or to get people excited, or to sort of like to retain people for another 6 months because that's what matters to you in your career. Maybe you're thinking about leaving as a sales leader anyway. And like, if that's what you're looking for, then yeah, those things potentially are helpful. If what you're trying to actually do is build a growth culture and like build something and invest in something and invest in trying to get people to stay for years and like to build careers at your company, and you're like thinking about not next quarter's numbers, but like next year's numbers and trying to invest in that, those things don't work without the sort of follow-on coaching and implementation and integration. My best friend does, he's a psychedelic assisted therapist. And so he gives people sort of like psilocybin and different, and like deals with all sorts of interesting life challenges that people are going through. And what he's told me that I think makes so much sense, and and the training that he had around it, is that people think the actual sort of trip experience itself is going to be where meaningful transformation kind of happens. And it's like, no, you glimpse an insight then there's in those, but really the rubber meets the road, the work of it, the bulk of the actual change happens in the follow-on and the implementation, right? And if you just have that high, literally in that case, right, without the grounding it in sort of experiential, like daily life, it doesn't do anything. And I think that's also true ultimately of those sales trainings. And so from a positioning perspective, I want to go in and be like, no, we'll turn down this business because we don't think it worked. Like our ICP or my ICP is someone who is invested in and interested in long-term sustainable growth and transformation. And therefore I only sell engagements that are that training with sort of some sort of follow-on coaching. And maybe using AI scalably potentially makes that like more affordable for some people. And this all sorts of interesting things to explore there too, to your point. But can you say no, right? The ability to say no, to turn down business, to turn down revenue, right? To focus elsewhere, to take the bird in hand and let it go and go look for something net new is like terrifying and potentially crazy seeming right in the moment. But it's that you have to have confidence in yourself. You have to have confidence that what you're doing is going to work out, confidence in some greater good power in the universe that's conspiring in your success on this, to put your money where your mouth is, right? And actually focus on delivering the most value where you believe you can deliver value. And if you don't ultimately believe that those workshops are going to deliver what somebody wants. Now, if someone says, I'm really only interested in just having a workshop and seeing this bump, and that's cool, and you're like, all right, I'll take your money. It's if we're going into it with sort of with that. But if you don't believe that they work for what the person wants, I'm of the opinion that, then walk away. Like, just don't engage in work that you don't think you can do your best work at, even if that means foregoing the short-term revenue, because long-term, ultimately, that's what's going to make you successful.
Yeah, that's the ultimate power play. I think I've gotten referrals from people I've rejected, which is crazy, right? But I think people respect you,
right,
for not taking their money when you can't, because you can't. Like, ethically, you cannot. And I have that offer. Like, you can get a 2 day workshop. Hell, you can get a 1 day workshop, right? But I will warn you, the results of this are limited. It's not cheap. If you're investing in this, you might as well add some follow-up, add some coaching. And they go, oh yes, but I still want the 2 day workshop. Are you are you sure? Like, do you understand what I told you? This is not ideal. Like, there should be some more. So they insist, okay, you want a 2 day workshop. You do you, happy to deliver it. But you need to warn them beforehand that, okay, this is not how we work. And also this is not ideal for you. If you really, really want it, and if that's what you dream about, having a 2 day sales workshop, so be it. But in some
And
cases, when you are discovering a client and they tell you something that tips you off and tells you that their sales team is basically crashing down and they need close help, then I agree with you. You turn them down. It's like, this is not what you need.
there's a difference between someone saying, I'm not sure if we need the follow-on coaching. I'm not sure I can make that investment this time, but I'm open to it. I hear you. I get you. We're sort of philosophically aligned, but I can't necessarily commit to that financially now and doing it. And sort of maintaining your integrity in that respect and sort of that authenticity. And someone who's just like, you know they're not going to buy the follow-on coaching. You know they're not going to be interested in the long term. They only want this. And if that's the case, sort of again walking away from it versus the more like technicality, formality of ideally you buy these together, but maybe you're not ready to. And so we can sort of break this down to steps and take it piece by piece. But again, going back to that sort of like, well, how does a deep tech startup be successful? That's what you're ultimately selling, is that vision towards that thing, right? Like, how do we break this down into steps whereby, right, I want to sell you these sort of end state and like offtake agreements, for my thing that doesn't exist yet. And obviously that's not going to be, unless like the thing we agree on right now. But how do we break this down into kind of demonstrations of value and milestones along that journey where we continue to kind of build alignment and ensure that we're moving in the same direction towards the same shared vision of a future state? And I think that when people don't see that from customers, they and try to sort of like be playing this game of trying to be multiple things to multiple people in multiple states and trying to think, and the founder or the founding team thinks that somehow they're the ones holding together this like complicated multi-arc narrative, weaving together this long-term thread. That's exhausting, right? That's so complex, right? Again, versus it's actually quite simple, but not easy to just say, here's our vision, here's our North Star, here's what we're committed to. And we've raised some venture money or we bootstrap, whatever this looks like. And this is what we're doing. And we might fail. Sure. This is, but if you want to join us, if you share this vision, come on it with us, help us inform us, help us shape this, join us in this vision, as opposed to, looking for some hack or system or way to ensure success at all costs, which usually is not possible. The world doesn't work that way, right? And you end up selling your soul and selling out to do that. That's the only way you can get that sort of success at all costs, is by kind of killing some part of yourself along the way.
And I'm not an expert on investor psychology, but I do believe that an investor hearing an honest pitch will be more likely to say yes than if they smell that you're lying to them, or you lie to them and then they find out, which is worse. Because an honest pitch is like, okay, this is our vision, this is where we're going. This is not going to be immediate, but these are the steps of how we make it a profitable thing in the coming X amount of time. I would argue that, and I don't know if I'm right, I might be wrong, but an investor would appreciate that, especially somebody that's investing in deep tech already. So they know that this doesn't pay off in 6 months. It's not SaaS. They know the risk that entails being in deep tech. So yeah, what do you think?
And then you're going to have that person on your board. I also tell people that, like, when you're going out in fundraising, just like we talk about an ICP, an ideal customer profile, and how important that is sort of like the grounding point of your whole commercial strategy. Like, you need an ideal investor profile when you go out and you invest. And there's this, like, people will engage in these fundraising cycles of like just talking to everybody and putting up these data rooms for everybody and giving everything to everybody, and sort of like the power dynamic that you try to not have in these sales conversations comes into this investor play, when ideally ideally you have, again, an ideal investor profile because you're looking for someone who's going to not invest in you, but then be on your board and work with you to have this vision. So if you can't find someone who's willing to invest in you and in your vision and the way you want to go about building this, and you feel like you have to sell out to do that, again, what are you selling? Like, there's you're gonna kill some part of you along the way, your mental health, your sanity, your vision, your integrity, some part of you. Like, if the goal is just, I need to raise this money, I need to do this no matter the cost, it's going to be a different cost than it might be to just, either stake your success on a clear vision of what you want to be doing, what that looks like, and being kind of open to that might open other roads for you in your life and what you're going to do and how your career might unfold, or just it doesn't work out, and that's okay. And better to know that early than to stretch that out over years and burn tens of millions of dollars only to have a slow, agonizingly painful death. Again, this is also to the pivot that I've had recently in sort of my offering an ICP that we talked about. Like, I wouldn't have said any of this like weeks ago because I was sort of so focused on, trying to win VCs to refer me to their clients, to their founders. And now I've realized that like my ICP is a type of founder or professional or advisor or consultant who's not into that whole game. Doesn't want that, doesn't want to sell out, doesn't want to be a puppet of these VCs. And that's how a lot of it works. And the majority is that. And I think the minority is someone who says like, I don't like that. I don't want that. I want to do it a different way. And that's who I'm pursuing. And that means saying potentially, controversial things that might lose business that I don't actually want ultimately.
But the thing about controversy is that it repels some people and it attracts others, and that's in the debate it creates. That's why it matters, because the right type of controversy will actually bring to prominence your value proposition, whatever it is, right? We're just used to controversy in other contexts, but in the end, controversy is that. And you said something interesting, which is, you mentioned an ideal investor persona, and I can, I've talked in the past, I had a few startup clients, and the idea of having an ICP is already terrifying enough for them. And that's with 7 billion people on Earth, right? So their ICP will essentially be, by default, millions of people. I can only imagine the level of dread and fear and existential trauma that a founder endures if you propose to them to have an ideal investor profile, because that means, oh my God, you mean I cannot ask for the money of all the investors and there are so few of them? Like, you're asking me to narrow down that pool of investors that already is very likely to say no. That must be terrifying.
So it is. And I think one way I've gotten people maybe not over the hump or like to take a step in the right direction on that is to, whether it's sort of starting a pitch or starting sort of outreach or an email or a search, or even just communicating it and putting that out there into the world, that sort of a set of assumptions that an investor would likely have to agree with in order for it to make sense for you to invest in, right? So often when people are struggling with their pitch, it's like trying to frame up the problem in that sort of like Sequoia-esque model of like, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the market opportunity? And like, there's so much ink has been spilled, so much energy is spent on trying to make that sort of important enough, or trying to like educate people about why this matters. And isn't it just, it's definitely easier, but I think ultimately it makes just so much more sense to say, hey, our thesis on the mental health market, on the AI market, on whatever it is, on gene therapy, on fusion reactors, whatever it is XYZ. We believe that these things are true. The market's heading in this direction. These are the things that are going to be ultimately important. These are the challenges where others have failed. And the one who wins will somehow, differentiate in this, and this way. And you're put that right. That vastly limits now who you're talking about, but you're you're instead of trying to sell people in this like complex journey, like, well, first you have to agree with that the problem is a problem. You have to agree that the market is the size. You have to agree that like, why don't we just short circuit that and say, like, there's some investor out there who's looking to make an investment in a certain space, in a certain company, right? They have a thesis, they have the good ones anyway, right? They're looking to make a bet on a horse in a certain race, and so why not signal and put out there into the world, or even just start a conversation with someone that, like, hey, we believe that these three things are fundamentally true about the market and where the space is headed. And if you don't, the rest of our pitch isn't even going to make sense to you, right? So tailor it first, just really tighten it up and talk to that specific audience. And if they don't agree with you, then like the whole, why then set up a data room for them and sign like and have them look through all this stuff and then give them all the follow-ups, all the follow-up analytics that they want, and like just the amount of wasted time and energy and effort pursuing bad venture deals, bad sort of relationships it's the same advice we give people about not pursuing bad commercial deals. Like just stop chasing people who aren't going to be a good fit and focus where there is alignment.
I mean, both of us being in sales, I think you'll agree with me that you cannot qualify somebody without disqualifying somebody else. It's it's just it's why we call it qualifying, because some people can't qualify, and that includes investors. Listen, I've kept you already for like over an hour. So I want to be mindful of your time. I know we could go on for like another hour probably.
We'll have to do a
Um,
sequel.
I usually write the potential title of the show in the
Yeah.
like during the episode. I We were so engaged in the conversation, I didn't have time to do that. So that will be my next challenge. Uh, anyway, Max, where can people find you and get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn at my Max Gilbert, and my website is Tiferet, Tiferet .life, which is all the .coms and orgs were taken, and Google domain suggested life was a subdomain, and I loved that. And but LinkedIn is where I sort of, we post a lot of content. More on if any of these topics are interesting. This is what I talk about all the time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
People, this was the Tech of Tomorrow podcast with Sebastian Hidalgo. You know who I am. You know what to do. Subscribe, follow, and comment if you want. Share this, even better. Share this with a founder who needs to learn how to sell. Because in the end, I think if somebody listens to this, they will realize that, oh my God, they didn't talk about sales. We actually did the whole time. It's just that sales is not what you think. And it's
Mm.
not as complicated as you think it is. It's simple, not easy. With that said, I will see you next week. Max, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.